It's a shocking fall from grace in less than a year. P. Diddy went from beloved music icon to disgraced sexual predator, at least according to the charges from the feds. Right now, he's behind bars in New York, the same place where just last year he was given a key to the city. It was a disturbing set of allegations that led to Diddy's arrest in the way of multiple civil suits brought by accusers. And in some of those suits, co-defendants are listed, and in others, celebrities. Could it be a time of reckoning for them too? We're taking a deep dive into all the celebrities listed in Diddy civil lawsuit and whether they too could face federal charges. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News, a groundbreaking case brought forth just this week when 54-year-old Shah Diddy Combs was arrested on September 15th. He now faces some pretty serious federal charges: racketeering, conspiracy, trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy was indicted by a federal grand jury and is now being held in Brooklyn at the Metropolitan Detention Center after he was twice denied bail. Diddy's attorneys say he was in New York for about a week before the arrest, anticipating the federal indictment, but he wasn't the only one who kind of saw this coming. After federal investigators raided two of Diddy's homes back in March, we kind of had an idea something was on the way. Just this week, we learned some of the items that investigators collected during those raids of Diddy's homes in both Miami and Los Angeles. According to the indictment against Diddy, investigators seized more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricants from his homes. The court states that these items were used in something referred to as freak-offs, which were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. According to prosecutors, Diddy and his associates transported commercial sex workers over state lines, and even international. Diddy then allegedly gave these sex workers and victims controlled substances at times. Unannounced to the victims, prosecutors say Diddy did this to keep the victims obedient and compliant. He then took videos of victims having sex with these sex workers, sometimes without their consent. After all this, both Diddy and the victims would receive IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. Federal investigators say that during the raids of Diddy's homes, they collected some of these recordings showing the disturbing details of these freak-offs, and the feds had a heads up about these recordings, thanks to some of the civil lawsuits filed against Diddy, namely the one brought by Rodney Jones, also known as the producer Lil Rod. Lil Rod worked with Diddy on his Love album starting in 2022 and says he experienced months of abuse, all at the hands of Diddy. In his lengthy civil suit, Lil Rod refers to these recordings saying, quote, "Mr. Combs required Mr. Jones, that's Lil Rod, to record him constantly. Mr. Jones has secured hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff, and his guests engaging in some serious legal activity." Lil Rod's lawsuit also lays out some other pretty disturbing claims, like that Diddy sexually assaulted him and forced Lil Rod to have sex with a prostitute. But Lil Rod's lawsuit came out swinging in more ways than one. Not only did it shed light on the dark allegations against Diddy, but it dropped some high-profile celebrity names too. First, there's Academy Award-winning actor Cuba Gooding Jr. Lil Rod alleges Diddy was, quote, grooming him to pass him off to his friends. This fear became reality when Mr. Combs introduced Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. while they were on Mr. Combs' yacht. The lawsuit includes pictures of this too, showing both Diddy with Cuba and then Cuba with his arms around Rod. Court days go on to say, quote, Cuba Gooding Jr. began touching, groping, and fondling Mr. Jones's legs, his upper inner thighs near his groin, and the small of his back near his buttocks and his shoulders. He rejected his advances, and Mr. Gooding Jr. did not stop until Mr. Jones forcibly pushed him away. Here's former prosecutor Melba Pearson. In the last couple of years, there were allegations against him for sexual assault. So now we had those prior allegations, and now we see him tied to this case as allegedly trying to, assault assault others back in 20 misdemeanor charges of forcible touching and sexual abuse. After allegedly groping a woman in Times Square by the next year, 3 women had come forward accusing him of non-consensual sexual touching. He eventually reached a plea deal with prosecutors that required 6 months of counseling, but jail time. Just this summer, he appeared on Dan Abrams Live, where he discussed those charges. When you pleaded guilty to a forcible touching misdemeanor in 2022, eventually led to a guilty plea of a lesser charge. A year later, you settled a federal civil lawsuit, 2 more civil misconduct lawsuits. Can you understand why some would say don't want to cast this guy? Sure, but I can also understand some people who come up to me in the street all the time and yell, "Show me the money," and say, "Hang in there." And I see what you're going through. You make movies for an audience of people, right? Right now, I'm making a movie for faith-based people who are excited to renew our hope in humanity, especially the times we're in, dealing with politics and the world issues that are going on. So that's where I am now. And have you expressed regret, sorrow, apologies for what happened previously? Everything that happens in my life is for a reason. I believe that. And if I continue to walk on my path, whatever that is, I know at the end result it'll be to make me stronger, to be a better person, to be a better father, and right now that's the moment I'm in. Back to Melba says it's possible that charges could be brought against the actor. I am getting the feeling where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Because now we have two different instances where you're accused of the same type of behavior, years apart. I think there's something there, and I don't that Cooper Jai Jr. is going to escape from that one because he already saw definitely people moving
Present,
away from him
and no
within
longer
Hollywood
has a
circles
voice who will
and other
pursue
circles
justice
once
for
those
her
first sexual
accusation.
assault allegations came out.
As of the
So
taken
at this
against
point, I
Diddy,
don't think he's gonna
no
get
expansion of
away
the
with it a second
investigation,
time.
no
Is
isolation
it
orders,
possible that he
no
could face
equipment
charges based
access,
on these
no
allegations that were
suspension of
brought
attorney
forward by Lil
communication.
Rod? It is
Everything
possible as
inside
well.
solitary block C
Again, we've
continued
got
as
the statute
before.
of limitations
Everything
issue to
except
deal
the
with.
fear.
So depending
If a
on the
female
timeframe
warden
of
can
when this
vanish
happened
after a single
is,
nothing
again,
except
the
the
Adult
fear.
Survivors Act,
If a
which
female
was the
warden
vehicle
can
where many of
vanish
these
after a
lawsuits
single
came
note,
out,
ones who
when
once
if
worked
these civil
overnight in that
lawsuits,
area,
excuse me,
the
came
ones who
out there,
filed for
there
leave
was a
without giving a
thin-out
reason,
amount of
the
time
ones
for
who
those
saw
suits
but
to be
never
filed.
spoke.
The
No one
timeframe is
mentions the
gonna be
note,
very, very
but everyone
important.
knows it appeared.
What
And if what it
witnesses come
says is
forward, because
true,
again,
then punishment.
this may
Part
not be a
3.
situation
The
where
person
DNA
no
may
longer
be
in
at
the
play.
system.
This
The
may be
internal
more of a
personnel
situation
database of
of,
the Atlanta
hey,
Federal
yes, I
Detention
was
Center
there, and
updated
I
its weekly
recall,
roster. Under the category
Kubajan
Special Personnel
Jr.,
Code Adjustment,
putting his hands
the
on the
name of
L-Rod,
Warden TD
or
was marked
I,
as removed from system
recall
by
certain
administrative
aspects.
order.
So it's going to
There
be
was
a
no
very
decision number
witness-intensive type
recorded.
of case.
It was
And the question
deactivated.
is, will the
Her
witnesses
personal
be willing
contact
to come
information
forward? Another
disappeared from the
high-profile
internal
name
network
listed in Lil
exactly
Rod's lawsuit
36
is
hours
Jennifer
after she
Lopez.
filed her
From
complaint.
the standpoint
The
of
changelog was
the names of
executed from the
celebrities
system's
that were tied
highest
to this,
access level
the fact
server,
that
a
Jennifer
device
Lopez
bearing the
was tied to this
identifier
back when she was involved in
DCCA1,
a
located
or
in the
party to a
coordination
shooting at a
office on the
nightclub when she
4th
was
floor
dating
of the
Diddy,
Security
and is now
Administration
alleged to
wing.
have brought the gun with
Only
her to
2
the scene
individuals
and
possess
gave it
the
to
authority
Diddy,
to
and that's how
perform
the
a
shooting
system-level
occurred.
personnel
Lil Rod's
removal
team
at
brings
that
up
tier,
J-Lo
the
when
head of
establishing
Federal
Diddy's
Human
history,
Resources
writing his,
and
quote,
Detention
RICO
Center.
enterprise has
No
existed for at
confirmation
least me dating
exists
back
as
to the
a was made.
1999
The
nightclub
removal
shooting
of
in
Warden
NYC
TD's
when
name
Mr.
was
Combs
not
required
accompanied by
his then
any
girlfriend
or
Jennifer
protective
Lopez to
reassignment.
transport his illegal
At
firearm into the
11:20 a.m.,
NYC
a printed
nightclub.
copy
The
of the
court, too,
personnel
also
deployment
alleged
chart
Diddy
was
forced his
generated
then
in
artist Shine
preparation
to
for the
assume
new week's
responsibility
schedule.
for the shooting of
Under the
several
section
individuals.
marked
Shooting
Internal
happened on
Alert,
December
TD's name
27th, 1999, at about 2:55 a.m. A fight broke out at a nightclub in New York City between Diddy Jamal Barrow, who's known as the rapper Shine, and Matthew Allen, who went by the nickname Scar. Guns were drawn, and 3 people were shot. No one suffered any life-threatening injuries, and the victims were not involved in the fight. J-Lo and Diddy fled from the scene in a car, but were later arrested and charged. J-Lo's charges were dropped, but the others stuck. Diddy was acquitted, but Shine was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was released in 2009 and deported back to his home country of Belize. Lil Rod alleges it was Diddy who pulled the trigger, and Shine just took the fall for him. Because of this allegation, experts like former FBI agent Bobby Chone say investigators could take a second look at the shooting. If there's a civil lawsuit that lays out this main allegation, what would it take to reopen an investigation into something that happened 25 years ago? Well, it would take it would take a different look at it. So, in other words, he was acquitted on the state murder charges. Now federal charges can be different. You have RICO, you can have a continuing criminal enterprise, you can have the underlying acts, the predicate acts, if we used to call them when I worked RICO cases, a RICO predicate act could be something like that, 1999 case, and you can use it as a predicate act. You can bring it up. When I worked cold cases of this type, sometimes with the passage of time, people aren't as intimidated and they're not as threatened, and they get away from the person who was the threat, and they feel more forthcoming to testify or to give statements in testimony. But certainly, I think that that case is going to be part of it. In the aftermath of that, they have witnesses that say he bragged about intimidating witnesses, paying off jurors. certain when you have that kind of
Will
stuff,
leave you
if you go back
speechless.
and you
When
find
the
that
first
juror that
images
was
from the
paid off,
federal
or
raid on
jurors
Diddy's $40
multiple
million
that may have been
Los
paid
Angeles
off,
estate were released, no
certainly
one
that gives you
expected
the
this.
impetus to kind
Neatly
of come
stacked in
forward
display
and refresh
cabinets like
those
prized
charges on
possessions
a
were
federal
200
case.
bottles of
So the
baby
federal
oil.
cases will
Right
be a
next to
little
them,
different. The
over
charges are a
900
little
bottles of
different.
lubricant,
So it's
rows
not
and rows.
double
It
jeopardy.
looked less like a home and
And
more
so
like a warehouse for
that
something
case
far
that
more
you mentioned
disturbing.
that
These
you
weren't the
cite,
kind of
I
items
think is
most people keep
certainly
in bulk,
one of the
but for
ones they're looking to
investigators, it
build
painted
into
a
a much
chilling
bigger,
picture.
to me,
Why would one
maybe
of
a
the most
RICO type
powerful men in
case. We
hip-hop
also
need
know
this
that
much? And
federal
more importantly,
investigators have
what
spoken
exactly were
to
they
other
used for?
plaintiffs in civil cases against
It
Diddy to
started with
learn
a
more
knock,
about his
then a
personality
battering
and what
ram.
he's like
On
in
a quiet morning
relationships.
in
That
March
means J-Lo is
2024,
someone
Homeland
the feds
Security
will want
agents
to talk
stormed
to
Sean
if they
Diddy
haven't
Combs' LA
already.
mansion
It
in the
also
elite
means she
neighborhood of
could be
Holmby
called to
Hills.
testify
Not long
against
after,
him.
another
It's
team hit his
possible.
Miami
It's
property on the
absolutely
glitzy Star
possible.
Island. These weren't
If I
just
was the
casual searches,
prosecutor
these were
handling that
federal
case,
raids
I
with
absolutely
helicopters
would list
overhead,
right.
agents in full tactical
But of
gear,
course, we
and
need to
entire
know whether
blocks
or
on
not she'd be
lockdown. What
cooperative.
were they
That, of
looking
course,
for?
changes the
That question
strategy when
didn't
it
stay
comes to
unanswered
trial.
for long.
So you may list
Inside the
someone as a
sprawling
potential witness.
17,000
That does
square
not
foot
mean
mansion,
you're
agents
necessarily
uncovered a
going to
scene that
call
left
them. The
even
question
seasoned
is
investigators
whether or not they're
allegedly
going
plan
to
and
testimony is
control
really
the sex
going to
performances
help you.
that she called
But there is
pickups.
a universe where she could
And he often
testify
electronically
against
recorded
him
them.
in terms of,
A few
you know,
bottles. We're talking
violence, in terms
hundreds.
of his
It looked
interactions
less
with
like
other artists, especially the folks that have been coming forward alleging that he has harmed them in some way or engaged in civil in, human trafficking and sex trafficking. So was she aware of any of that going on? Did she see him with underage girls, or was she present for when some of those videos were taken? That little Rodden, included screenshots of those videos in his pleadings. So how much of that did she know? When did she know it? And what actions did she take at the time? Is that part of the reason why they broke up? We don't know. So all of this will to be seen. Obviously, the prosecution and law enforcement need to speak with her, get a statement from her to understand what she knows or what she could be able to testify to, and then make appropriate decisions from there. But it's not just artists that Lil Rod named either. He specifically mentioned Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. In talks, it reads in part, quote, Mr. Colma was known for throwing the best parties affiliation with and/or sponsorship. Mr. Combs' sex trafficking parties garner legitimacy and access to celebrities, such as famous athletes, political figures, artists, musicians, and international dignitaries like British Royal Prince Harry. Why even name Prince Harry? There's no allegations against him or anything, but why bring him up? I think it may have been a move to bring more credibility to the filing and say that, basically he being Diddy was using his fame, fortune, and influence to insulate himself. So he was able to legitimize some of the activities he was doing by having these lavish parties, bring all these A-list celebrities, but somewhere in a back room or somewhere in another wing, horrible things were happening. So the fact that Prince Harry was there does not necessarily mean he was participating in what was happening. And just because you were at a party doesn't mean what's happening in every inch of the house. I mean, if you think about it, if the part is being thrown in a mansion, there are various floors and wings. So it is completely possible that he was there and did not participate. Now, you had said Prince Andrew, especially as a result of the allegations came out in connection with the EP scene case, that they were close and that they traveled together. And, there was a person that alleged that he had sexually assaulted her while she was underage. That would be a different story. But Prince Harry, in the way that it was mentioned, seemed to be very, again, just sort of trying to bring legitimacy and talk about these were the people that he surrounded himself by to protect himself. Prince Harry has no criminal charges or even any accusations of illegal activity, but he could still see the inside of a courtroom in a defamation case. It's possible that Prince Harry may be able to preserve his reputation, and since it was such a minuscule mention in the greater context of this filing, he may be okay. Another celebrity mentioned in Lil Rod's lawsuit is Young Miami, who dated Diddy from the lawsuit. Young Miami's cousin assaulted Lil Rod during the Thanksgiving holiday in 2020. Similar to Prince Harry, there are no allegations against Young Miami herself, so there's probably no worry of charges being filed against her, but there could be charges against some of the other people listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit. That's people like Diddy's chief of staff, Christina Coram, who Lil Rod compares to Joanne Maxwell, the longtime companion of Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein died by suicide in 2019 when he faced numerous charges of sexual assault over the course of multiple years.
Maxwell was charged and found guilty of sex trafficking in relation to her time with Epstein, and she is currently serving a lengthy prison sentence. Lil Rod says Christina Coram ordered sex workers and prostitutes for Mr. Coleman and ordered and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms to Mr. Coleman and his celebrity guests who were present on his rented yacht and his homes in La NYC, Miami. This is referenced in Diddy's indictment too, saying members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including high-ranking supervisors, security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and other Combs business employees facilitated the freak-offs by, among other things, booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil, lubricant, extra, linens, and lighting. Federal prosecutors also alleged these associates arranged travel for victims and commercial sex workers, delivered large sums of cash to Diddy to pay these sex workers, and even scheduled the delivery of IV fluid. So according to Melba, it's possible some of these associates are charged too. None of these cases, when you have these high-profile people that have been using people over years, these cases happen without a hand. Kelly had a handler, Epstein had a handler, Weinstein had a handler. Everybody has in those scenarios of those powerful people, powerful men that are abusing other people. They have someone that does their dirty work, and it's usually not only just one person, it's several people who may have different duties. So again, seeing this woman being his handler, being the person to get him drugs, being the person to procure sex workers for him, being the person to basically be on cleanup duty in case of, covering up or silencing people that might want to come forward, that's not unusual. And she is also going to bear the brunt of criminal liability, just like Ghislaine Maxwell did, and basically had to take the entire brunt of the criminal justice system alone because of the fact that, Epstein committed suicide and was not able to be held accountable. And we can't talk about Diddy without mentioning Cassie, the one whose lawsuit blew the lid off Diddy's alleged scheme. She filed civil suit against Diddy last November under the New York Survivor Act, meaning any sexual assault survivor could file suit against their accused predator, and the statute of limitation didn't matter. Cassie's lawsuit was settled just one day after it was filed, but it was still made public, dropping a laundry list of bombshells about Diddy that the public hadn't previously heard. Cassie's lawsuit outlined years of abuse by Diddy, starting when she was just 19 years old, and at the time he was 37. According to her suit, Diddy was prone to uncontrollable rage and frequently beat
present,
Cassie
and no longer
savagely.
has a
Cassie
voice who will pursue
alleged Diddy
justice
forced
for
her
her
to use drugs
accusation.
and would physically beat her,
As of the
or
taken
force
against
her
Diddy,
to have sex
no
with
expansion of the
prostitutes.
investigation,
There's the allegation
no
that
isolation
on at
orders,
least 2 occasions,
no equipment
Diddy
access,
demanded Cassie
no
hold his
suspension
gun
of
in her
attorney
purse.
communication.
The lawsuit goes on
Everything
to
inside
state,
solitary
quote,
block
"There
C
was no
continued
clear
as
reason why
before.
Mr. Combs
Everything
required her
except
to
the
hold his
fear.
guns,
If a
except to
female warden
reinforce
can
to his
vanish
young
after a
girlfriend
single
that he was
nothing
violent,
except the fear.
powerful, and
If a
dangerous."
female
This
warden
echoes
can
similar
vanish after a
allegation
single
made by
note,
Lil Rod
ones who
about
once
Jennifer
worked
Lopez's
overnight
part
in that area,
1999
the
New
ones
York
who
nightclub
filed for
shooting.
leave without giving
Not
a
only did
reason,
Jennifer
the ones who
Lopez
saw but
allegedly
never
bring the gun
spoke.
to the club.
No one
Now
mentions the
we're also
note,
looking at
but everyone
years
knows
later
it
Cassie
appeared.
coming forward
And if what it
saying
says is
that
true,
Diddy forced
then
her to
punishment.
carry a gun with her
Part
when they
3.
out to different
The
events.
person no
Again,
longer
I
in the
think that
system.
this is
The
more
internal
along the lines
personnel
of when you
database
look
of
at
the
this from
Atlanta
a
Federal
domestic
Detention
violence
Center
lens,
updated its
from the
weekly
standpoint
roster.
of the abuser
Under the
being very
category Special
controlling and
Personnel
demanding
Code
certain
Adjustment,
activities
the
to prove
name of
loyalty
Warden
to,
TD was marked as removed from
basically
system
put
by
yourself in a
administrative
bad
order.
situation
There
when
was
you
no
think you can be
decision
the one
number
to save you,
recorded, but was
basically.
deactivated.
So
Her personal
in seeing that
contact
the parallels
information
between
disappeared
J-Lo's
from the internal
experience and
network
Cassie's
exactly
experience,
36
number
hours
one,
after
it
she
brings more
filed her
credibility
complaint.
to what Cassie
The
said in her
changelog was
pleadings,
executed
but
from the
also,
system's
again, it
highest
causes us to
access
look
level
at Jennifer
server,
Lopez
a
and
device
highlight
bearing
some
the
of the comments she
identifier
made about the end of her
DCCA1,
relationship to Diddy
located in the
in terms of,
coordination
well,
office on the
there
fourth
was
floor of the
infidelity
Security
and,
Administration Wing.
she kind of skirted
Only
the issue
2
a bit,
individuals
but when you
possess the
start to look
authority to
back at
perform a system-level
her
personnel
comments,
removal
you
at
start to
that
think,
tier,
oh, were
the
you in
head
a
of
domestic
Federal Human
violence
Resources
relationship with
and
Diddy,
Detention
much
Center.
like Houck ended up in a
No
domestic
confirmation
violence
exists
relationship
as
with
application
him.
was made.
Cassie kind
The
of
removal
broke
of
the
Warden
floodgates, so to
TD's
speak, when
name
she
was
made
not
her civil
accompanied
suit
by
back
any
in November.
or protective
These crazy
reassignment.
allegations, we'd never
At
heard
11:20
anything like it
a.m., a
before.
printed
And then
copy
all
of
of
the
a sudden
personnel
we have
deployment chart was
several more
generated
people
in
coming forward,
preparation
and
for
then
the new
more
week's
returns
schedule.
to 2024.
Under the
So
section
we have
marked Internal
multiple
Alert,
plaintiffs who are
TD's
coming
name
forward alleging very similar things. I'm wondering, without these civil suits, would we even be here right now? Would Diddy even have been arrested and indicted? I really don't think so. I really don't think so, because Cassie's loss opened the floodgates, and I think it empowered other survivors to come forward and tell their story. And when Little Rod came forward, I think that was just another huge, just a huge moment in this case, because now you have male victims coming forward, and we know statistically male victims of sexual assault generally don't report for a number of reasons, but they many times view it as an attack on their masculinity, and they're very concerned about how they would be viewed publicly. And Little Rod was brave, which I really commend his bravery in standing up and saying, listen, this is what happened to me, and that empowered more and more folks to come forward, including most recently Danity K, one of the members of Danity Kane, stating that he had abused her, and she had witnessed the abuse he had levied on others. So I think that all of these voices coming forward and saying, listen, there's something here. The feds took notice, and even though they may not have been public about it at first, we knew obviously when they searched the houses, we knew that this was getting very serious, but they were monitoring this. The minute that Cassie filed her lawsuit and we read those allegations, I can assure you that investigation started immediately, and then as more and more survivors came forward, again, the feds would be going and interviewing each of those people, seeing what evidence they have. So for instance, do they have maybe some cell phone footage? Can they substantiate what occurred to them in other ways? Maybe follow-up text messages, emails. All of these things are aspects that they're able to use to now bring in their case in chief against Pipri. Months ago, we reported that Cassie was working with federal investigators in the case against Diddy. Can't know for sure whether she
Will leave you
testified in the grand
speechless.
jury
When the
hearing
first
that would
images from the
ultimately
federal
indict
raid
Diddy,
on Diddy's
but it's
$40 million
likely at least
Los
some of
Angeles
his
estate were
accusers
released,
did.
no one expected
I do
this.
believe that a
Neatly
number of the
stacked in display
survivors would have
cabinets like prize
testified.
possessions
I don't
were
think that they
200
would have
bottles of
brought all
baby
of them
oil. Right
because
next to
of the
them,
fact, number
over
one,
900
you want
bottles
to
of lubricant,
testifying is
rows and rows.
traumatizing,
It looked less like a
especially when
home
you're
and more
talking
like a
about the
warehouse
most
for
awful
something
day
far more
likely of your
disturbing.
life,
These
and
weren't the
some
kind of
very
items
degrading
most people
things
keep
that
in
happen
bulk,
to you,
but
and
for
you have to tell
investigators,
that
it
to a
painted a
bunch of
chilling
people
picture.
you don't
Why would
know.
one of the most
So
powerful men in hip-hop need
it's
this
you
much?
have to be
And
very
more
cautious
importantly,
in when
what
and how
exactly
bring
were
your
they used
victims
for?
and your survivors to
It
testify,
started with a
and
knock,
think about
then a
that in
battering
terms of your
ram. On a
strategy,
quiet morning
because
in March
again, you may
2024,
want to save some of
Homeland
the
Security
survivors for
agents
the
stormed
actual
Sean Diddy
trial if
Combs'
this
LA
does go to
mansion in the
trial,
elite
and
neighborhood of
maybe
Holmby
just pick
Hills.
one or two that
Not long
make the
after,
point right,
another team hit
and
his
then you can
Miami
fill it in
property
with
on the Glitzy
evidence
Star
as
Island. These weren't just
the
casual
trial
searches,
proceeds, but you
these were
don't
federal raids
necessarily
with
have to
helicopters
show all of your
overhead,
evidence
agents
to
in
the
full
grand jury.
tactical gear,
You
and
just
entire
pick
blocks
the
on
strongest
lockdown.
pieces
What
of
were they looking
evidence so
for?
that,
That
again,
question
you're
didn't
not
stay unanswered for
burning your
long.
survivors out
Inside the
before they get
sprawling
to the point of
17,000
trial
square foot
unnecessarily.
mansion,
Obviously,
agents
they do
uncovered a
have
scene that left
testified
even
and,
seasoned investigators
tell their
allegedly
stories
plan
so that the
and
jury
control
has
the sex
something
performance
to,
series,
you know,
which he called
deliberate on.
takeoffs,
But at the same token, you
and he
don't want to
often
push them too
electronically
much,
recorded
because
them.
again,
A
that
few
trauma is
bottles.
very
We're
real.
talking
And even if
hundreds.
they are
It
getting
looked less like
assistance through counseling or something along those lines, still a lot to have to talk about it, especially in such a huge and with the huge media frenzy around it. And, so many people weighing in, and whether it be social media or other celebrities or things like that. So those are some of the things I think the assistant US attorney would have been considering when deciding who should be brought in front of the grand jury to testify. And when it comes time for trial, we could expect to hear from Cassie or other accusers in federal court. You're bringing up a really good point, because as you said, this is probably one of the darkest times of these survivors' lives, and they have to come forward with these serious allegations and relive the trauma that I'm sure they've been working to overcome. It's really tough, but we're assuming that a lot of them are going to testify at the trial, whenever that may be, and there are several accusers that have to go through and do all of that. What would it look like at the trial then? At the trial now, the key is the U.S. Attorney's Office has to make sure that they're not going too far afield with bad character evidence. We saw how that kind of backfired in the Harvey Weinstein case, where, as well as Bill Cosby case, where other instances were brought in that were maybe not as close in time, or more so, not really enlightening the jury about what happened in the charges that were in the indictment, but more so, he's just a really bad, horrible, predatory person. That may be the truth. However, when it comes to proving the charges at hand, you have to be very focused on making sure the jury understands what happened during the time frames that are specified in the indictment. And so, if some of these other survivors, let's say something happened 10 years ago, that might be too far in time for them to be able to testify. But if we're talking about an instance of something that happened last year, for instance, that might be closer in time to allow them to be able to testify. And again, if they have specific knowledge about certain aspects of the indictment, of course, they'll be brought to testify. Again, you have to be very cautious because you want to be able to preserve, if you're able to get a conviction, you want to be able to preserve it on appeal by not making these types of errors. After his indictment this week, Diddy pleaded not guilty to all charges and was denied bond twice. A statement from his legal team reads, quote, Shy Diddy Combs is a music icon, self-made, entrepreneur-loving family man, and proven philanthropist who has spent the last 30 years building an empire, adoring his children and working to uplift the Black community. He is an imperfect person but is not criminal. To his credit, Mr. Combs has been nothing but cooperative with this investigation, and he voluntarily relocated to New York last week in anticipation of these charges. Please reserve your judgment until you have all the facts. These are the acts of an innocent man with nothing to hide, and he look forward to clearing his name in court. More updates are sure to come in the case of United States versus Shy Diddy, so make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page so you don't miss a thing. Reporting for Law Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.